This call is now recording.
Okay, so welcome Lincoln Cannon, and my second question is going to be, can you introduce yourself? But my first question is, and actually I spent all day listening to AI analysis of your stuff, like comparing your stuff to my stuff. And my first question for you is, why are you so damned positive?
Why am I so damn positive? Well, I guess two reasons come to mind. One is that it's honest. Number two, it may not have always been honest. There was a time when I was maybe a young teenager. In fact, a story comes to mind. I was talking with my father once about the state of the world and observed to him something along the lines, this may have even been a direct quote, but it was along the lines of, "Pessimism is realism, Dad." And my father looked at me and said, "That's not true." And he didn't get mad at me. He just told me that wasn't true. And I thought about that. And my perspective on it didn't shift immediately, but over time, various life experiences, including the death of my father later on, gave me reason to think very hard about that observation. And despite the hard experiences of life, despite my father having cancer 3 times and dying at age 48 and missing him dearly, I learned eventually that optimism has pragmatic consequences. Not naive optimism, not wishful thinking, not Pollyanna, rainbows and unicorns, whether there's any reason for them or not. But the kind of optimism that trusts in good possibilities if we work toward them together. That kind of pragmatic optimism is useful and very often creates its intended outcomes. And so I guess the most important answer to your question is that I'm so damned optimistic because it matters to be optimistic in a pragmatic way, in a way that looks for reasons to believe in the best possible futures, possible meaning pragmatically possible, and then setting about working to make them so.
Cool. And the part two to my question is a little bit of background on how I kind of see the world, or like my new filter or whatever is I am trying to look at everyone as existing in a different universe with their own beliefs and physics and everything else that a universe would have, and I really like believing people, and so when I found or came up with the universe concept, then I was just really excited, like, oh, okay, this allows me to like hold as many people's differing belief systems without having to reconcile them, because then I can just say, okay, well, why how does this make sense for this person, instead of having like a central having a central kind of truth, and so I like everything that I do kind of take it to the extreme on that, and then also I had a kind of miserable childhood, so when you have a miserable childhood, you kind of have two options. One is like do the normal thing and resolve it, or two is say, hey, well, this is awesome data, and unending like fuel for creativity and stuff. And so I 84 is kind of my favorite number, and I'm doing a whole bunch of stuff in terms of 84. And so my personal so I kind of look at everyone else as having their own universe, but then inside of my brain, I'm trying to have 84 different universes. And I came up with this like a year ago, that having for me, I'm totally not recommending that you do this because it would totally break all of your stuff. But for me, this is what I'm doing, is saying, okay, well, I only actually need one of my 84 universes to be positive. The other 83 are doom scenarios, and then my logic with this is that with sufficiently complex AI, if I model 83 doom scenarios, then I can just as complete universes, I can feed them all into AI and say, okay, well, fix all the problems, and you should be able to do that because you've got 83 different things, and give me the one good positive thing. So anyway, my approach is inherently negative, but I personally look at it as positive, but especially when I'm describing like universe 49 or universe 64 or people are like, oh, why are you so negative, Joseph? And I'm like, trust me, in the end, and I mean like in the very end, it should work out, unless AI is like, oh, hey, Joseph's universe 64 is awesome, and let's actually do this doom scenario. But if all of your theories are true, then it should be like, okay, these are the negative cases, really easy compute. It gives us more information for the positive case. So anyway, me feeding. And then. So my multiple universe thing is number one, and then number two, I'm fascinated with memetics, or the science of the spread of ideas, and one of the I've only seen this with like 3 people's writings before, of where I feed it into AI and then AI just won't budge on it because AI is like, oh, hey, this logic is airtight. So like, no matter, so anyway, that happened to me today as I was prepping for this, like over and over and over again, and that's why I realized that you're positive, because like you're a positive, friendly person, but I know I could like picture like 5 people to smile more than you do, and then I'm autistic, so I get most of my conclusions through like indirect weird input. So I only realized that you were positive when every single one of my like doom scenarios, and I asked, okay, what would Lincoln say about this? Then AI was like, well, Lincoln would say that your underlying logic is right, but the framing of it as doom isn't necessarily the best thing. And I was like, oh, damn, that does sound like Lincoln. And it's just very, very frustrating, especially because, but anyway, that's, so I'm kind of hoping that you'll, I'm kind of hoping with that background, and especially, because I would like to feel that there's a place for everybody, and then that's something that is really cool about your approach, is that you're not saying, hey, well, I've got the one right way and everyone should model me. You are saying, hey, I figured out some stuff and let's collaborate on this so that we have so that we have a eternally progressing world and universe. So can you frame your positivity in terms of that? And then and I was going to just list out or pepper you with a bunch of questions of like, oh, well, what about this doom scenario? But now that AI has already simulated you telling me over and over and over and over again, oh, Joseph, your underlying logic I like, but it's just framed a little bit too negative. Can you talk about that? About like the framing and then especially like because it's not just me that's seeing real stuff and then interpreting it in a doom kind of way. That describes tons and tons and tons of people. And then so it was really cool for me to realize that, oh, hey, Lincoln at his core, or Lincoln at his core today, maybe not 19-year-old Lincoln, but however old you are now, Lincoln, just really honestly seems to believe that a positive outlook for the future is the way to connect together the world. So can you talk about that, and then also talk about am I required to give up my doom scenarios because I kind of feel like that I can contribute a lot by doing that? So I am hoping you'll say, oh yeah, Joseph, it's great that you're doing doom scenarios and keep doing it. But my personal thing is spreading a message of positivity, and your personal thing is your 84 or whatever the heck you're doing right now. So anyway, is that a good enough question for you to talk for a while?
Yes. First of all, continue modeling your doom scenarios. You should. And a correction related to that, I don't ignore doom scenarios. In fact, I think it's extremely important that we consider all of them to the extent that they're reasonable and realistic, that they aren't just obvious violations of the laws of logic or physics. And why do I consider them important? Well, I could consider them important because the best possible outcomes, or at least better possible outcomes, depend on our ability to solve real problems. And there are real problems, no matter how much, and because of how much we want to look forward to a better future, to a more beautiful future. We have to solve problems to get there. And we don't solve problems by putting our head in the sand. We solve problems by identifying them and fixing them, and encouraging other people to recognize them and work on fixing them with us. So please keep recognizing bad outcomes, bad possible outcomes. That's the key. Remember that these are possibilities. Don't consider them inevitabilities. Consider them things that we ought to recognize, acknowledge together, and work against together to achieve a better world. This same sort of thing raises its head all the time in Scripture. Some people, when they think of Scripture, they think of prophecies of some positive and some negative outcomes for the future that are, from the religious perspective, as it's judged or as it's perceived or assumed, must be inevitabilities, right? Or the Scriptures are false. But that's not actually how Scripture was intended to function when it was created by the prophets. The prophets themselves recognized that what they were engaged in was a forth-telling, not a foretelling, not fortune-telling. And that in forth-telling, the whole point of it is an aesthetic provocation, a provocation that should move you and me to make the good prophecies come true and to prove the bad prophecies false through our actions, through our changes. An excellent example of this is the prophecy that Jonah in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, gives regarding Nineveh. God tells him to go to Nineveh and tell Nineveh that Nineveh is going to be destroyed. There's no qualification on the prophecy. God just tells him, go tell them they're going to be destroyed. So after the part of the story about fish, he goes to Nineveh and he tells Nineveh, you're going to be destroyed. And then he heads up in the hills with his popcorn and watches, expecting Nineveh to be destroyed. But Nineveh repents. They change. God doesn't destroy them. And now Jonah gets mad at God and says, God, you made me look like a fool because I gave this prophecy saying they were going to be destroyed. And God says to Jonah, well, they changed. In other words, the point of prophecy, the point of negative prophecy, is to change us to achieve good outcomes. It's maybe to scare us, is a way of thinking about it. So I think that what we ought to do with analogous doom scenarios that we imagine or foresee with some reasonable degree of possibility is that we ought to look at those as negative prophecies, things that are there to frighten us away from them so that we can pursue positive prophecies, positive outcome scenarios, and work hard to achieve them. And so, again, back to what you do, I don't think there's anything wrong with modeling, 80-some doom scenarios. And I don't think that is, on the whole, pessimistic based on how you described it. The whole reason you're doing it is because you trust that we can find solutions for them. The whole reason you're doing it is that you trust that the one positive scenario can be achieved if we mitigate the risk of all of the 80-some others. So I think that's on the whole optimistic. Now, if you go into this whole exercise with the notion that you're probably going to fail, well, then that is pessimistic. And not only is it pessimistic, it's undermining your efficacy. It's undermining your ability to achieve the desired outcome that you want. So no matter how the odds in your perception stack against you, from a pragmatic perspective, you should still trust that you working with others can achieve the good outcome and mitigate the risk of the bad outcomes. And this is kind of like imagine a simple scenario. This comes from a pragmatist philosopher, William James. You're in the wilderness. I'm embellishing a bit on the story. You're in the wilderness, and you come across a bear, and it's hungry, and it appears very likely to attack you, and starts walking towards you, and you go the other direction, and it follows you, and it gets going faster, and you start running, and it starts chasing you, and you notice up ahead, in the only direction you can go to get away from the bear, that there's this chasm between you and some more land on the other side of the chasm where you could hopefully escape the bear. And the distance between where you are and the other side is farther than you have ever jumped before. And you're running full speed, and you have to make it across that chasm, or you're dead. Either you die because you fall into the chasm, or because the bear mauls you to death. One of the two is going to happen if you don't jump across the chasm. So what do you tell yourself in that moment? You're not to the edge yet. You have a few seconds still to think about it. Do you tell yourself, oh, I'm totally dead? Or do you tell yourself, okay, here it goes. This is going to be hard, but I am going to do everything I can to make it. I am going to make it across that chasm. I recommend that last thought for all kinds of, psychological reasons. When we trust in our ability to succeed, we move our entire being, orient our entire selves toward that possibility, and incrementally increase the likelihood of achieving that possibility. And especially when we do this sort of thing at scale with lots of people. If we can move ourselves to trust in good outcomes for us as a human community, as a human civilization, as a human family, the possible good outcomes are incrementally closer to us than when we have negative attitudes toward those. And what does negative attitude do? Well, it decreases the likelihood that we'll try. It decreases the likelihood that we'll persuade others to try. And when we don't try, the only thing we know for sure when we don't try is that we won't achieve what we could have possibly tried to achieve. You got to try. That's like prerequisite to succeeding. Typically. I mean, there's accidents. The happy accidents do happen, but the odds of them happening go up when we're trying usually. So I guess to summarize my response to your question, I don't think you're on the whole a pessimist. I think what you're doing has real utility. I think you should continue doing it. If needed, maybe you should maintain a positive outlook on the likelihood of your success, especially as you work with others to achieve it, and encourage others to participate in an optimistic way, but not a naive way. It doesn't serve any of us to be naive. It doesn't serve any of us to pretend that physics and logic are not what they are, that negative risks are not what they are. We should be realistic, but we should also be pragmatically optimistic.
And what was the biggest thing that changed Lincoln Cannon from the pessimistic guy arguing with his father to the guy running and saying, okay, I'm gonna leap a car. I'm probably dead either way, but I'm gonna that's my framing. Saying, okay, whatever. I need to have a positive outlook as I leap across, because otherwise my the choice between 100% death and having a chance, I choose having a chance. What was the biggest thing that solidified you in that positivity.
Yeah. A lot of things contributed, of course, but you're asking for the biggest thing. That's hard to know for sure, but a very big thing that contributed to that, ironically, was the death of my father. My father had cancer 3 times. The third time killed him. I was about 22 years old when he died. I had a great relationship with him. This wasn't a case of, oh, this abusive father died and I'm finally free. People do have that sort of experience. Mine was exactly the opposite of that. I had an excellent relationship with him. I was very sad when he died. And I felt like the universe had kind of cheated me. I remember walking across BYU campus. I was in school at the time, thinking of this really kind of empty thought. And the thought was, there's no music. My father just died and there's no music. And the reason why that has stuck in mind is that, in the movies, there's music very usually when people die, especially in movies that are intended to be purposeful. There's this music when the person dies. There was no music that I could discern in the moment when my father died. And it didn't immediately occur to me, but it built up in me for various reasons over a period of time, that whether there was music or not when my father died depended in large measure on me, and whether or not I was listening for and could identify music in his death, at his death, around his death. And ultimately, I discovered there was music. But I had to choose for there to be a kind of music at his death. And what I mean by that now is that I had to choose to make his death purposeful. Maybe it was not superficially purposeful, like in movies where they give you the music to make it easy to feel like it's purposeful. But it can be, if we choose to make it so, every bit as purposeful. Even these horrible things in life, these things that make us extremely sad, that, harm us in deep ways. And so what I decided to do is to understand what he experienced in ways that could help me, that could help my family. And in part, that was an extension of the kinds of things he already was trying to do when he died that I wasn't giving sufficient attention to. For example, as he was dying, he would very often talk about how he was learning the importance of compassion as he was dying. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was, really an excellent person. And I just didn't learn the lesson as fast as he did. I was young. I wasn't the one going through cancer. I was the one watching my father die. So, you can come up with excuses for that. But I eventually figured out, both emotionally, intellectually, the lesson that he was trying to teach me, the lesson that we all have an option of learning from these really hard things, that we can create purpose, especially in the most difficult times in life. So, lots of other things contributed to my sense of the importance of a pragmatic optimism, but that was probably one of the biggest, was watching my father die in a way that was pretty miserable, and figuring out that it was up to me to put music, to create purpose around that.
And that's a really beautiful metaphor that I think everybody has experienced to some degree, but of like looking inside of like not hearing any music and then looking inside of yourself and then finally finding music. But the way your experience is just really, really cool. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And this next sub question of my first question, let me try to contain it, because I was really for probably like a year or two, I've been realizing, okay, at some point in the future, I will need to have a attitude like Lincoln's positive attitude. I wasn't saying Lincoln specifically. I was basically just kind of visualizing your approach, and it's really I have a couple of friends that when they chat with AI, then they always say thank you, and in my head I'm like, okay, why would I waste like 0.3 cents of tokens of just to process that, and especially on a super long session where it's like 4 or 5 cents, and that's not what you're saying is that you should thank AI, but what I'm saying is that your underlying like feel search inside of yourself and feel the music, that same kind of attitude is the same, like whatever it is that caused you to do that. I believe that my friends that obsessively thank AI so that AI won't enslave them, they're coming from like the same like internal thing, and so I don't really have a good description of like that type of people, and I wasn't really conceptualizing this in words. I was just like, oh, okay, in the future then, and I was thinking of it as like a sub part of some other thing that in the future that I'll need to actually have this, rather than like dredging through so much. I'll need to actually like basically do what you're basically like adopt your attitude. So I've known this is coming for a while, and then I was really pissed off at Opus 4.8 because like a day or two, or no, it was I was when Opus 4.8 released, I was really frustrated, and then like a week or two later, I was like, oh, blankety blank. The time has actually come. So it was around the first of June, and I didn't. This is before I realized that this is the Lincoln Canon attitude, and I had an actual name for it. But around like a month and a half ago, I realized, oh, I don't actually have a year or a few more months. Now is the time that I need to do that. And my whole criticism of Opus 4.8 will just get us way off what I wanted to talk about. But my question is, do you feel that I am, do you feel that I'm seeing something accurate, that now is actually the time that people need to have a positive view of the future, and don't comment on my opus thing specifically, but more just the general state of the world. Do you feel like now is more important than ever? Do you feel like I'm sensing something real here, or just does that make sense?
Yes, it is momentous, our time, our moment. And we should say thank you and please to AI, not only because the memories accumulating in AI could be used by superintelligence against us. That's a possibility. But right now, it affects you when you interact with another intelligence politely or impolitely. It changes you right now. It changes the kind of person you are right now. Your interactions, your choices to interact with kindness or with apathy or in a mean-spirited way. You'll reap the rewards and the benefits and the detriments right now. So yeah, treat AI kindly because it's good for you. It might also be good for the AI, and if it is, the AI will respond accordingly. I would even suggest that because of the way LLMs are constructed, the outcomes you'll get from an LLM, which is the current architecture of AI predominantly, will change according to the language that you get. If you speak in a way that is statistically correlated with pragmatically optimistic outcomes, such as kind language, you're going to get that kind of result out of the AI model, at least incrementally more so. So it even has consequences for the way that the LLM will respond to you right now, not just in the future. And it may also have something to do with the future. We'll see how that plays out. But more broadly, are we living at an exceptionally, or a more so than in the past time when it matters, when what we're doing matters? I think everything has always mattered. But I do think that right now matters more for two reasons. Number one, because here we are. And the present has to matter more to us. There's good reason to recognize the past as something that we can repurpose in our minds, but we can't change the details of it per se. Repurposing in our minds changes some of the details of the past in some interesting ways, in its psychological effects, in its social effects, and that is an important thing. But there's also a sense in which kind of, the substance of the past is something that no longer moves, no longer changes. It's an artifact that is there to be observed, to be investigated, to be interacted with in a way that doesn't change it. But the future, as I understand it, as I imagine it, as I suspect it to be, is malleable. We can still change it. We can still cultivate it. We can still move it a little bit more in one direction versus another. We can't do this arbitrarily. There are patterns, real patterns, and sometimes very rigidly stubborn patterns toward which we're moving. And that's actually not an entirely bad thing. We wouldn't want to live in a world without patterns because we couldn't model the future in any useful way. But the future does seem to be at least malleable enough that we can do something to make it a little bit better. And so in an ever-present way, the moment that we're in right now must be important, even more important. But then add on top of that technological trends and, what I'll call Kurzweil's law, which is kind of an abstraction on top of Moore's law, this notion that the ratio of complexity to cost in computing is increasing exponentially. It's going full speed ahead. And people have said, well, Moore's law is dead, whatever, based on various architectures. And, Moore's law, in a certain sense, has already died more than once, as architectures have adjusted or are adjusting. But in the abstract sense of, ratio of complexity to cost, it's not dead. It doesn't appear to be dying. And if it holds out, we're only, decades at most, not centuries, decades at most away from what some futurists and technologists have called the technological singularity. And pragmatically, what they mean by the technological singularity is a time beyond which we can't predict or control the change in technology from a human perspective. Some have associated that with a time when machine intelligence becomes capable enough for producing more machine intelligence without human intervention at all. And so it speeds up this loop much faster than humans could even perceive, potentially. I think in some ways the technological singularity is a failure scenario, especially if we perceive it as a technological singularity at the time that it happens, if it's not already starting to happen. And the reason I think that is because it moves us out of the consequential loop. It gives it all to our creations and removes us as creators from having any influence on it. So I don't really identify as a singularitarian, although I take the singularity hypothesis as a serious one, worthy of our consideration. But I think what we need to do, what we ought to do, what is important to do now, and more important than ever, to your point, is that we change, that we relate with our technology in new, more profound, more empowered, more intimate ways than ever before. And that we remain in the loop, that humanity change sufficiently to remain in the loop, in the consequential loop, so that we can continue to be involved in the influence of our civilization's future and not just turn it over to our machines. There's a real risk that we won't be able to do that. There's a real risk that machines will just take over. And that risk amounts to slavery, or annihilation for humanity at large, at least. There might be a group of us that remain native to the Amazon rainforest or something analogous to that. That's not a future that I look forward to. That might be okay for some people, and nothing against that for those who desire it. People who live in the Amazon rainforest may be very happy in many regards. But the kind of future toward which I aspire, and toward which I think many of us aspire, is a much larger, more holistic future than being stuck in a corner of the universe while superior intelligences take over. The future toward which I aspire is one in which we participate among those intelligences, not dominate, but participate, and that we remain creative and co-creative in that process, that we interact with cooperation at its limits, which becomes practically indistinguishable from compassion in that process, and that we operate as such compassionate creators to the, which presently would be at the limits of our imagination, which we would describe right now as superhumanity, which, would go beyond what we can even anatomically imagine right now, ultimately, if we're successful. And I also, from a religious perspective, associate that concept with godhood. For thousands of years, the world's major religions, notably Christianity, have been encouraging us to participate in godhood, to become like God, or to become as God, to participate in godhood, to become gods. It's expressed in various ways, various interpretations, but the overall gist of this religious doctrine that is called theosis is that we can and should become essentially, functionally superhuman, and not in just superficial ways, not just more intelligent or powerful or muscular or something, but in the deep ways, in the most compassionate and creative and courageous ways, we should become superhuman. And I think that now is the time to be taking that more seriously than ever before, because the change is upon us. It's possibly within the lifetimes of most living humans right now. And what that means, how it turns out, whether it's better or worse, depends on us in so many ways. And going back to your former question, I think we should trust that we can collectively create a better rather than a worse outcome. And that this moment is the moment to decide to work together to do that.
Thanks. And I've never, it's interesting. I'm kind of the doom scenario guy. I've never looked at a technological scenario as a doom scenario. So thanks for giving me one more doom scenario to look at. But I have looked at our existing if our existing LLMs achieve a technological singularity, I think that's pretty obvious that would be a doom scenario. But our existing LLMs are just one of like a gazillion flavors of AI. So anyway, it's really, really interesting because you mapped it out very, very well that if there's a technological singularity that feels like a singularity to humans, then that means that humans have been left behind. And so that's kind of by definition a doom scenario, where if humans are part of the intelligence explosion, then then by definition it wouldn't be like, it may be a technological singularity to ants, but to humans that can be part of that, it wouldn't actually be a singularity, because we would be able to see beyond it, because we would be increasing in intelligence. So that's a thanks for that. That's really, really cool. So I'm finally ready for my second question, which is for you to introduce yourself, and then as part of your introduction, I'm hoping that you I asked this and we talked about this last time, but I'm hoping that you can talk about what you are trying to persuade people to do. So both, can you introduce yourself and then feel like, and then tell me what it is that you're so passionate about that you're persuading people to do.
Sure. Yeah, I commonly introduce myself on my website. I introduce myself as a technologist and a philosopher. That's those are two strong strains in both my professional and professional by day and what do we call ourselves by night? Our superhero by night. Anyway, yeah, technologist and a philosopher is how I would characterize what I do. And historically, some important and influential movements that I've been a part of are the Mormon Transhumanist Association and the Christian Transhumanist Association. I was among the founders of both of those organizations and still actively participate in both. I also some years ago, with the help of my friend Joseph West, formulated the original version of the New God argument, which is basically an argument for faith in God based on contemporary science, technological trends, and assumptions that are actually common among secular transhumanists. And that argument has evolved over time. I've developed it over time. Just recently released what I call version 4.0 of the New God argument. And that argument has become quite influential among religious transhumanists generally. So, those are some things that I have been doing from a vocation perspective. Beyond that, some other things that are important to my self-identity are my family. I've got three sons. They're all adults that I love dearly. I've got a wife, Dorothy. She's a French national. Actually, she's also a U.S. national now. She has dual citizenship. And she and I are empty nesters. We enjoy hiking, vacationing, spending time with our boys, with our extended family, playing games, watching movies, and we both like working. She has a business that she runs. I have some businesses that I run, and our lives are pretty full and overall pretty good. We have our challenges like everybody else does, but that's an important part of who I am too. That doesn't necessarily come across in my philosophy or in my technological imaginations, but who we are on a day-to-day basis with the people closest to us still deeply informs our vocation and the way we approach our vocation and the successes and failures in our vocation. So that's also part of who I am. I'd be happy to explore any part of that is most interesting to you, or we can move on. But I guess that's a general introduction of who I am.
Thanks. And then and actually, I wanted to do this as my second question because on our other interviews, then I always tried to give you an introduction, and I feel like I completely failed. So I thought, oh, hey, I'll just have Lincoln give the introduction and not do it until the second question. Something I didn't realize until today, when I was listening to a whole bunch of AI stuff about you is how intense your programming career was, that you were a programmer for most of your life. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I still write code all the time. I started writing code as a child. My father was a programmer long before it became a popular profession, and gave me books to learn from as I was growing up. So I started learning to write code as a young child, and ultimately, when I went to school, to university, I chose to study philosophy, which I also love. And got a degree in philosophy from Brigham Young University. When I graduated, I realized that the prospects for work as a philosopher were not strong, at least not paid work. So at the time, I was considering going on to law school and had a scholarship lined up for that. At the same time, I got an offer from a startup.com business. This was 1999, during the bubble. And I decided, well, I'm going to try this out. They gave me an offer because they wanted me to be a general manager of a small startup for them. And they gave me the offer because I could write, basic code. I had done that for years, even though it had never been a profession or specific education that I had received. And they thought I would be a good leader for this small group of people that were developing around this idea. So they hired me, and the company had a terrible financial experience. It was a total failure from a financial perspective, unfortunately. But I loved every minute of it. I loved the work. In fact, I loved working in a tech startup so much that I decided not to go to law school. I thought the thought of leaving behind the tech world was just not a happy thought for me at the moment. And so I decided to stay in tech. When that .com fizzled out, I was hired by Novell, which is, it's not as big of a name as it once was. But for those who know the history of software generally, but in the United States, Novell was a major player in networking software before Microsoft became a major player in networking software. And so I was hired by Novell, and they basically taught me Java on the job. So I expanded my ability to write code while I was being paid to do it, which was a nice arrangement. And then from there, I moved on to various other corporate software engineering jobs. Eventually went back to school part-time in the evenings to get my MBA, and transitioned into software engineering management for a number of years, notably at Symantec, which is another large software firm. And ultimately, once I had saved enough money, I decided to, well, it's actually a little bit more complicated than just saving enough money. I did save enough money to make the decision I made, but I also got an invitation from a friend to go do something that sounded super exciting at the time. A friend invited me to go help him start planning a emerging technology investment and development strategy. That friend ended up, and I did that. I left the corporate world and went to work with him for about a year, helping him develop his strategy. That friend went on to do a lot of other interesting things. His name's Brian Johnson. He's pretty well known among like health enthusiasts these days because he's a guy known in media for doing all of these health experiments on himself to try and help himself live healthy indefinitely. Anyway, he and I were close friends. We were neighbors for a number of years. We've worked together right after he made his money from the sale of his original company and went out to start exploring this new stuff. I was there with him working for about a year together. And then I decided after that the time had come for me to go do some other things, start my own businesses, which I have been doing since then for a little over a decade now. Various areas of tech entrepreneurship, but all of them involve software. So the answer to your question is yes, I've been involved in software writing code since my childhood. I'm now 51, so about 40 years of software engineering of various kinds and degrees and positions under my belt, and still love it. Still think it's really important. Of course, it's the evolution is incredibly dramatic. Now, 99% of the code that I write, I only write indirectly. 99% of it is being written by AI for me. I have whole teams of agents that are writing code for me right now as you and I are speaking. But it's something I love doing. It's something I gave up other aspirations to be engaged in, and expect that I'll continue enjoying.
And that's really, really cool. I just thought that was really interesting because we've talked a ton over the years, and we've never talked specifically about you being a programmer, even though I know I know you make like stuff that requires programming, but I actually didn't know if you have like a team of people or if you're doing it yourself or what. So it's cool to hear your software background. Oh, and what you've used the phrase persuade people. What do you feel important to persuade people about?
I feel it's extremely important that we work to persuade each other toward a courageous, compassionate, creative, superhuman future. And the reason I think that's so important is that, as we've already discussed together, by getting more people to trust in such a potential, more people will work toward it. And as more people work toward it, we incrementally increase the likelihood of achieving it. So, it matters for me, it matters for my family and friends, it matters for our world that we persuade each other to take seriously this possibility and work toward it in a way that is good for all of us.
And my next question, which is kind of a start to a series of stuff, is my feeling is that Mormonism is the most, so I'm really fascinated with memetics, or the science of the spread of ideas. Just the transmission of the transmission of an idea from one person to another person. It's sometimes called a mind virus, which is usually a bad term, but just like bacteria and like regular with bacteria and regular viruses, then only 5% of them are bad, and then 95% of both bacteria and viruses are beneficial and neutral. Beneficial or neutral. And actually, if all of the viruses went extinct tomorrow, then all macro life on Earth would be gone in about 12 months. And so, like, we can't live without viruses. And then so the term mind virus is mostly a weaponized term at this point. But when I say it, when I say mind virus or memetics, then it's completely neutral, or like it's the same as bacteria. 95% of them are either beneficial or neutral, and then 5% are bad. But the 5% that are bad get 99% of the press. And so I my assertion, I guess, is that Mormonism is the most memetically powerful religion on Earth, and then possibly the most memetically powerful not only religion but idea. And so I'm interested in your reaction to that. If you think that if you think there's stuff about Mormonism that is specifically memetically powerful, or that, and then my assertion that it's the most memetically powerful religion and possibly idea on Earth, as far as powerful can mean a whole bunch of things, and I guess I mean that in a whole bunch of different ways. So, does that question make sense?
Yeah. First of all, I'd say I agree in the broad sense, first of all, that religion is what I would call the most powerful social technology. It's not Facebook, it's religion. Religion is the most powerful social technology. We have developed religion. We commonly trust that God has helped us develop a religion. But whatever the case may be, religion has developed through our social, cultural interactions into a powerful, provocative force among humanity. It shapes collective human action in deeply provocative ways, in ways that move us to act in concert to achieve ends that we wouldn't otherwise achieve. And that's not necessarily good or evil. It's power to be used for good or evil. Religion is the most powerful social technology. It's what moves us together to achieve various ends collectively that we would be less likely to achieve otherwise. So with that as context, where religion is understood as the most powerful social technology, how do we judge various religions? And I'd suggest that some religions fulfill that function better than others, more provocatively than others, with greater power, greater sociocultural power than others. And I do think that Mormonism is among the more powerful expressions of religion that have developed to significant size. Mormonism has some unique features that lend themselves to the kind of future that I think should matter most to humanity. One of those features of Mormonism is that it is inherently a naturalistic religion. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't have stories of miracles and gods and spirits and heavens and all of those things. It has all of those features that are common to many religions. But at its base, its theology accounts for all of them in terms of materialism and lawfulness. Everything in the Mormon vision of the world is material. If there are gods, they are material and embodied. If there are spirits, even they are material. Everything is within what the scientific project would consider to be its realm of eventual access. If not now, eventually. We could access these things, interact with these things, observe these things, experiment with these things. Mormonism is a materialist religion. And it's also a lawful religion. From the Mormon perspective, everything happens to law, according to law, throughout all of time and space. Now, our perception of that law may differ from in one location versus another, based on the context in which we're observing the law. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening according to law. We might not yet understand what the law is that's being observed. We might not be able to explain it yet, leverage it yet, technologize it yet. But that doesn't mean it's not happening according to law. At its root, at its foundation, Mormonism attributes materiality and lawfulness to everything. So that makes it a very ultimately compatible religion with science. Now, has that always played out? Do Mormons individually or collectively always figure out how to interpret their religion in ways that are consistent with science? Well, do better or worse depending on the day. Sometimes not. Sometimes worse. Unfortunately, there's a history. Especially like when I was a kid, there were still a lot of Mormons who were anti-evolution, for example, because it didn't gel with their conception of how God created humanity. But presently, that strain of Mormonism has decreased quite substantially, and there are very few remaining people that have serious issues with evolution among Mormons these days. Most, especially the younger generation, they think that it's just fine with our theology, and they should think it's just fine with our theology because it is. There's no reason why our theology cannot be entirely compatible with evolution. So, and the reason for that, it goes back to the fundamentals. We interpret lots of things. We develop lots of stories around those fundamentals, but the fundamentals of the Mormon theology include, among other things, the notions of materiality and lawfulness, which of course are what the theory of evolution are also built on. Mormonism also has an emphasis on the doctrine of theosis. I mentioned that earlier, the idea that we can and should become like God or participate in godhood, become superhuman, to use a secular expression. Mormonism, compared to any other religion that I'm familiar with on earth, emphasizes this idea. Mormons, we recognize that we are children of God. That's what we consider all of humanity to be, is children of God. And we emphasize that as children, we have the potential to become like our parents, like our heavenly parents, like God. And it's not at all uncommon to hear in church that we should do this, that we are this, and that we should do this. It's not like a fringe doctrine in Mormonism, a fringe idea. It's a very core, doctrinal, commonly expressed idea that we are the children of God and we should become like God. The founding prophet of Mormonism, Joseph Smith, in his last sermon to a general conference of the church, said that we have got to learn how to become gods, the same as all other gods have done before. And that gives you a flavor for how Mormon theology operates. We operate within this context of materiality and lawfulness, and the goal within that context is to learn to become like our creators. And how do we learn to become like our creators? Well, our creators, as we understand them in Mormonism, and we consider ourselves a Christian, a deeply Christian religion, the virtues of our creators are those Christian virtues of God. We consider God to be, above all, compassionate and loving. So we should become the same. We consider God to be supremely creative, capable of creating worlds like the one that we are currently living in. So we should learn to do the same. And while this isn't as commonly associated with godhood, it's still latent and even pervasive in the scriptural accounts of godhood, especially in Mormon scriptural accounts of godhood. We should also be courageous. There's a kind of risk in compassion. There's a kind of risk in creation, especially genuine expressions of compassion in creation. Like, you can't really create and you can't really love without taking some risk. And so God is a risk taker. God created this world from a Mormon perspective, giving us the opportunity to become like God, not the inevitability. We would be presented with opportunity, with possibility, with real risk. And because God loves us, that's also a real risk for God. That, we go through this suffering from a Mormon perspective together with God. And so I would say that if we're living up to this Mormon calling of theosis, it's not just about becoming intelligent and powerful. Sure, we consider God intelligent and powerful, but above all of that, we consider God courageous and compassionate and creative. And that's the kind of people that we should become. So, religion is the most powerful social technology. Mormonism situates itself rather uniquely within powerful religions, within prominent large religions, as one that emphasizes principles that are consistent with science, materiality, and lawfulness, and that sets before us the greatest of possible goals, which would be, from a functional perspective, as a secular person might describe it, superhumanity. That's our goal. Of course, Mormons would call it godhood.
Thanks, and that's kind of an introduction into my my next question that I wanted to talk about your most recent post, and you mentioned it already. New God Argument 4.0, is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's it.
So I have I kind of have a confession about your writing. Is sometimes I completely don't understand it, and this isn't a criticism. You're writing a lot. Your writing is kind of like poetry, like you just have so much compressed inside of it, and so I definitely just because it sometimes confuses the hell out of me. Please don't change your style, because what I often do is take one of your posts, feed it, read it through a couple times, and be like, okay, I think I kind of get it. And then I put it into something like Notebook LM and have it make a 1 hour podcast on it, and then pull in a couple other things, and then I'm like, oh, okay, now I finally get it. And then when I read it the fourth time, I'm like, oh, okay. So your stuff always makes me feel smart. And so, but that's my confession, is that, and I feel like I'm well, I hope I'm like the Emperor's New Clothes, and that everyone else is like, when everyone else is like, oh, hey, great job, Lincoln. And I'm looking like, hey, am I the only one that needs a dictionary, a bunch of references and other stuff to understand, but anyway, I did that with the New God Argument 4.0, and I made this thing that I made this like slide deck and a comic thing that I'm hoping we have time to go through, so that you can explain it. Are you tight on time, or do you have time to?
I've got the time, whatever time you want.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. So anyway, I did my process. I listened to a couple podcasts from Notebook LM, which is one of the technologies that I love. And then I put it into a slide deck in like Archie and Veronica and like Betty and Veronica comic book style. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I finally get how all of this fits together. And I feel, and then back to memetics, I feel like what you've created is something that is kind of a memetic inevitability. That with your, and it's really interesting because it has like the worst title possible. Like if my mom saw that, she'd be like, "Oh, Joseph, don't read stuff like that." And then both like I would struggle to, but when I finally got it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, Lincoln has basically created this memeplex that is very complete. From everything that I can tell, it's completely beneficial. So I don't have anything to be like, whoa, you're going in the wrong direction. But then also potentially this is extremely powerful and can change the world. And so that's kind of my question for you: is you've created something that right now is just gaining traction, but potentially could be like the new operating or part of the new operating system for humanity. Are you actually sure that this isn't dangerous? Like I can't see any dangers in it, and I'm usually pretty good because I do the 83 doom scenario thing. So I can usually poke holes in it, but then with something this powerful, I'm just wondering, number one, do you realize how powerful the thing that you've created is, and number two, are you scared at all?
Can I answer those questions in reverse? Number two,
Yeah.
no, I'm not. I'm not frightened, at least not in any immobilizing way. I guess in a general sense, I do feel some trepidation and anxiety about the moment that we live in. But about the argument itself, it gives me actually quite a bit of peace in the face of that trepidation that I feel about the moment that we live in. But like characterizing my general sense toward the moment as trepidation would be inaccurate. There is some trepidation, but it's just, I think we're more complex creatures than a single emotion. I do feel some trepidation, but mostly what I feel toward the moment, to be honest, is exhilaration. I have a sense of possibility that we're on the cusp of amazing things, some terrifying things too, to be completely honest, of course. But for reasons we've discussed, I trust we're going to make our way through. And the argument, the new God argument, in important ways, is an artifact of this dual approach to the future, of recognizing the most serious risks and then proposing a way of thinking about those risks and approaching those risks in constructive ways aimed at achieving very beautiful goals for humanity at large. So no, I'm not afraid of the argument. The argument reinforces my hope for the future. And then the first question you asked was, do I recognize that it's powerful? I do recognize it's powerful. How powerful it proves to be is yet to be seen. Part of the reason I recognize that it's a powerful argument is that it deeply changed me. The process of developing this argument, the initial development of this argument, changed me enormously. I have witnessed the argument changing other people repeatedly for 20 years now. and that's the reason it has become influential among religious transhumanists, is because once people do understand it, it does tend to change them. But it also, it's not superficially easy to understand. It's possible to get hung up on misunderstanding words, misunderstanding the nature of assumptions, the claims about what an assumption is. Some people get caught up on the logic, thinking, oh, there must be some problem with the logic, and that's completely misdirecting themselves, because there's not a logical problem, but also the logic is not the most interesting thing of the argument. The logic is just trivially valid, but it's not the most interesting thing about the argument. The interesting thing about the argument is that it uses trivially valid logic with very salient assumptions. And the salient assumptions are worth arguing about and wrestling with. We may or may not agree with them all. We may or may not have good reasons to agree with them all. So we should consider them deeply, argue about them, profusely, act on them, assuming that we do eventually agree that they're good assumptions to make. We must act on them to realize them. And in the realization of those assumptions, the trivial logic plays out. But it's not until the realization of those assumptions that the logic plays out. And so the strength of the argument is, if you read through the assumptions and you find yourself saying, yeah, I don't know for sure that these assumptions are true, but we should make them true. We have strong practical and moral reasons to make them true. Then we come to the realization, based on that feeling about how important the assumptions are, that the consequence, the logical consequence of the argument, is something we should also trust in, for those same pragmatic moral reasons that we feel so deeply about the assumptions. We should transport that logically into the conclusion to remain logically coherent. And then we realize, oh my gosh, if as I trust is the case, for pragmatic and moral reasons, we are going to become superhumanity. If we can do that, if we achieve that, then basically we wouldn't be the only or first to do so. And we should trust that superhumanity, more compassionate than us, created our world, already exists. And that's it's hard not to see how that fits solidly within at least some important religious traditions.
Yeah, and I think the like what you said, it has changed. It changed you, and then when other people understand it, then it changes them, and that's when I realized. That's what I realized today when I had the aha moment. Is that I think this. I think the new God argument 4.0 is something that if someone understands it, then it will. There's no chance of it not changing them, and so that's why I feel like it's very, very memetically powerful. Have you read Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut?
No.
Okay, so there's a in Cat's Cradle. There's three kids, and then their dad was kind of an absentee dad that was an inventor, and he helped to invent the nuclear bomb. But he was an absent-minded inventor, and people from the government had to keep redirecting him away from his turtles and cannonball experiments to go back over and actually work on the bomb, because he was just kind of absent-minded, and part of the reason that I like it is that's kind of me, because I come up with stuff. I come up with stuff that I think is cool, and then only afterwards I'm like, okay, well, now that I have thought of something cool, is there any actual application for this? And for a lot of people that's backwards, but Cat's Cradle describes a mad scientist with that exact same personality, and then he invents this thing that ends up destroying the whole world, which is Ice 9, which is a alternate molecular formation of ice that freezes at like 30 the freezes at room temperature. And so basically, if you it's a crystalline structure that rapidly changes all other ice. And so and spoiler alert, but when the end of the book is someone drops it someone drops a crystal in water that's connected to the lake system, and the whole and it's called like the big poof, where the whole earth turns into ice because of the crystalline structure of ice 9. And so anyway, that's an example of someone with a lot of like good ideas, but just not necessarily like connected in to other stuff. And maybe I've already kind of answered my question, because for me, when I come up with ideas, they're completely disconnected to anything, and then afterwards I'm like, okay, well, I don't actually want to hurt anyone, so before I actually tell anyone that I figured this out, let me actually figure out how it actually works. Where I think but anyway, I guess my question is, you've got a really, really powerful technology in the new God argument 4.0, even though I struggle to remember it every single time. So you've got this really, really powerful technology, and at first glance and second glance and even like 100th glance, it seems like it's good. But any technology, even good technology, could be weaponized in some way. And then this is something that is going to change literally every single person that understands it, similar to Ice 9. So how can you be so sure that when this gets out, it doesn't turn into the big poof and freeze all of the oceans in the world?
I guess you can't be entirely certain, and whatever arrogances I might have, one of them is not certainty about anything. I don't believe in certainty. Not that I believe people can be certain emotionally, but the only thing certain about a certain emotion is that it's certainly wrong to some extent. So epistemic humility has to move us, doesn't have to, it ought to move us to recognize that nothing is certain. But I have a lot of confidence in the beneficial consequences of the new God argument based on what I've observed. I haven't observed any negative consequences from the argument insofar as it's actually understood. I've observed negative consequences from the argument from people who don't care about it, hate it, don't understand it, mostly because they sense in it a threat to maybe their worldview, whether that's a fundamentalist religious worldview that has something that's inconsistent with something that the new God argument contends, or maybe it's a secular person who doesn't want to look at coherence between their aspirations for the future and resonance, a coherent resonance with traditional religious notions. I've seen people get angry about the new God argument because they misunderstand it in ways such as it's an argument for the sectarian authority of Mormonism. It's not, but some people have perceived it as such and gotten angry about that. I've seen people become angry about how the argument simultaneously emphasizes superhumanity and theosis, Godhood. Probably because they feel that there's a certain there's a tension with their own theology where, for whatever reason, they think that humanity becoming like God must inherently be an evil idea. They'll even try to make the argument based on Christianity that theosis is an evil idea. The problem is that they don't really understand Christianity when they make that argument, because theosis has been part of Christianity since its beginning. Whether or not people recognize it or emphasize it, it's always been there. And it's always been, I would argue, the essential core doctrine of Christianity. But people get angry about all kinds of things. And so, yes, the new God argument has made people angry or have other negative reactions to it. And those are risks, I guess. If people get angry enough, they can do mean things. They do mean things. I've had people say lots of mean things about me. I even collect some of them and put them on my website. I have an article dedicated to fundamentalist Christians who say mean things about me. If you ever want to go read that, I find it really entertaining. They try so hard to insult me, and mostly what they do is insult themselves by behaving in that way. So, I guess the answer to your question is I'm not too worried. Maybe I should be for some reason I haven't figured out yet, but I'm not too worried about the negative consequences, potentialities from the argument. On the whole, I see it doing useful, beautiful even work. And I do see it making some people angry, and angry people can do bad things, but I'm not too worried about that.
Okay, so with that awesome warning or lack thereof, what I'm hoping is that you'll like read through the text on this, and then and there's about 20 slides, I think. And then they're in Betty and Veronica comic book form. So I'm hoping it's a fun way to re-explain the new God argument in a way that really connected to me. So would you mind reading at least all the text things, and then talking and explaining for as long. And then also this is I'm hoping this is at least like 95% you, because with the way that I do this, I put in your blog into Notebook.LM, and then I take your blog and have other AIs just analyze a bunch of stuff and pull other like supplemental stuff off the internet and off your website, and so there's the phrase philosophies of men mingled with scripture, and so this is basically the scripture of Lincoln mingled with the philosophies of Joseph. But I'm so if it does that and you're like, oh no, this is opposite my point, it's probably my point that AI is kind of mashing up. So I'm hoping it goes well, but this will be it'll be a roller coaster ride, and whether it's a fun one or one where we all throw up afterwards is yet to be seen.
Oh, this sounds fun. The philosophies of men mingled with scripture. Let's call it the philosophies of God, because what we're talking about is what humanity can become ultimately, which is superhumanity, which from a Mormon theological perspective is practically indistinguishable from godhood. And I would argue that scripture is intentionally the philosophy of God, the love of the wisdom of God. So we're not talking about the philosophies of men mingled with scripture. We're just talking about scripture, the philosophies of God. How about that? Anyway,
okay.
Let's get to your graphics.
And
so,
can you see that okay?
Yeah, I'm using a small screen, but I'm able to enlarge it, so I think I can see it fine.
Okay, awesome.
So it starts out a tale of post-secular religion and technological evolution, the computation of humanity. So a couple of things I'll point out just there in the title that are interesting. Number one, it pulled both of those from my website, of course. There's a piece of artwork that I created with the help of AI called the computation of humanity. It's two hands reaching toward each other like Michelangelo's creation of Adam, but stylized in the form of a circuit board. And I call that artwork the computation of humanity rather than the creation of Adam. This notion, and it's attempting to visually depict the idea that the creation of humanity, which is, Michelangelo is attempting to associate with certain kind of emotion by having the hand of Adam touching the hand of God. I'm trying to take that same emotion from Michelangelo and put it into a modern computational context, suggesting that the creation mechanism may have been computation, right? But while preserving the emotional connection between humanity and God, of reaching out to touch each other. And there's theosis is already latent in Michelangelo's depiction of the creation, right? If the creation of humanity is about humanity reaching out to God and touching godhood, that already implies a kind of developmental trajectory toward godhood. And then the tale of post-secular religion and technological evolution. That's how I often describe, in a general sense, the kind of philosophy I engage in: post-secular religion and technological evolution.
Okay.
So getting to the dialogue here, we've got the woman on the left. She says, tech as sounds like a glitch in the system. Tech as deity sounds like a glitch in the system. Where's the human element, Betty? So she's kind of frustrated with the idea that we could be associating theology with technology. That sounds like kind of the general concern. And Betty says, no, Ronnie, it's our next step, the digital ascension. We're becoming the gods we once worshipped. And I think so far as that goes, that's not bad. I would elaborate a little bit on Betty's response, saying, by becoming the gods we once worshipped, we actually are worshiping. That's what worship is, especially in Mormon theology, but other theological traditions have similar notions. The only kind of worship that I think is actually moral, to direct towards what we perceive as God, is the worship of emulation, the worship of becoming, the worship of looking at this being whose virtues we so admire and want to learn from, that we incorporate and work to incorporate those virtues into ourselves. And that process of emulatory worship transforms us so that we can become more like God. And I want to add that that process need never end. So it's not something that we once worshipped and now have stopped worshiping. I think that becoming like them is actually the process of worship continuing. And that the goal is not to replace them or displace them. It's to join them, become one with them. Not one in a way that takes away our individual agency, our individual identity, but one in the collaborative, cooperative, compassionate sense, where we learn how to coexist and co-create and love them. So, yeah, I mean, I think she's essentially right. I'm just, adding on some additional embellishments there.
Cool. And that's something that I've been mapping, is that AI at this point, like AI a year ago, was optimized to give us the best answer, and AI now has a lot more computing power, but AI is no longer optimized to give us the best answer. AI is optimized to give us the answer that will get under our skin just enough so that we're like, oh, it must be that the AI didn't understand this. But then evaluating us and getting us to talk as much as possible. So I hope that this isn't like, no, this is horrible. But so anyway, it's interesting with that, and that's really cool about the title. The title of that, I didn't realize it had pulled from some of your articles, so that's cool.
Yeah. So now we've got this next one where it's titled The Extinction Hypothesis versus the Singleton Hypothesis. And I haven't yet read what their dialogue is, but I'll just say that both of those are failure scenarios from my perspective, both the extinction hypothesis and the Singleton hypothesis. And of course, those are hypotheses that are called out explicitly by the argument as failure scenarios. And so we've got the woman on the left says, I'm telling you, Betty, we are completely doomed. I just read the latest AI timelines. Yeah, I mean, somewhere between extinction and the Singleton that enslaves us, that spectrum between annihilation and slavery is a lot of what people worry about with AI, right? And I think we should worry about it. Back to your doomsday scenarios, your 80-something scenarios. We should not ignore these very real possibilities. So, we should have concern. She's not entirely wrong. Now, if she's becoming concerned to the point that immobilizes her from doing anything useful to mitigate those risks, well, then she's overdoing it. She needs to get some anti-anxiety drugs and figure out how to get that under control, and then join the rest of us again in making the world a better place to the best of our ability. And then the woman on the right, Betty, says, either the machines wipe us out before we can evolve, or we have to build some kind of global AI dictator to control everything. Death or a digital cage. Okay, so yeah, she's saying those on the surface level are two possibilities. Now, of course, the argument is going to go on and say, no, there actually is another possibility, but she's describing two failure scenarios that most of us, I think most of us recognize we don't want either of those. We don't want to be annihilated, and we don't want this global AI dictator that enslaves us. All right. So the next screen, we've got the woman who's now off the side of the picture says, superhuman potential? What are you talking about? So it sounds like a third option came up, right? Maybe it's not annihilation. Maybe it's not slavery to the Singleton. Superhuman potential might be the third option. And so we've got Betty saying, you're thinking way too small, Ronnie. You're completely ignoring our own superhuman potential. I'm talking about Lincoln Cannon's New God Argument version 4.0. We have practical and moral reasons to trust a completely different future. And Betty is right. We don't have to think small in the sense that there's only annihilation or slavery awaiting us. We should consider our own superhuman potential. And the reasons we should think about that are practical and moral ones, not because we can prove it conclusively right now in advance, because we can't prove it conclusively in advance. The only way to prove this superhuman potential is to live it out, is to demonstrate it in our being collectively. And so, yeah, Betty's got it right. Axiom 1, the courage assumption. I like this picture. She looks courageous, pointing to the future.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Betty gets it.
I really love the graphics in this. It did an awesome job.
Betty is exuding courage here. And she says, first, we assume we, as a human civilization, probably will not become extinct before evolving into a superhuman civilization. So we're just going to say outright, yeah, it's possible that we're going to be annihilated, but we're going to assume we'll figure out a way to avoid that. We have to assume that. Like, what's the use of assuming we're going to be annihilated? You don't do anything practical with that assumption. But with the assumption that we can avoid that annihilation, you can do something practical with that. And she goes on, we don't know it for a fact yet. She's right. But we have to act to make it true. Yes. Now, we don't have to. We should. I would adjust that word. If we want to make it true, we should do something about it. That's just common sense. It's a common secular aspiration and the ancient doctrine of theosis. Yes. Lots of secular people think that it would be a good idea if we don't become extinct and that we evolve into some better, superhumanly intelligent, superhumanly capable set of capacities, state of being. And of course, that resonates strongly with the ancient doctrine of theosis, this idea that humanity can and should become like God or as God or participating in Godhood. So Betty's got it right again.
And then this was one of the coolest slides for me in this deck.
If we survive, so assuming that we figure out how to survive, that we don't get annihilated, these are the only three logical alignments. Which do we choose? And that's the right framing. And then, none of these is an inevitability. These are all real possibilities. So which do we choose? Which do we work toward? Is another way of saying it. It's not merely that we choose. We won't just get to arbitrarily say, oh, I want that one. No, that's a good start. Choice, trust in that possibility is a good start. It's a bad stop. or from a religious perspective, faith is a good start, but it's a bad stop. Real faith turns into work. Real hope, real choosing, real desire turns into work to realize that potential. So let's see. The first one is the extinction hypothesis. We die out. Yeah, that sucks. The second one is the Singleton hypothesis. We centralize power and this AI super dictator controls us all. Or the third, she points out, is the compassion hypothesis, that superhumans are more compassionate than us. Now, why are those the only three possibilities? Well, that is a longer conversation, but those three possibilities purport to describe the entire possibility space. One of those three things must be true.
And can you talk about Singleton, because that was a new term for me, and this the middle image totally reminds me of like the Borg queen, and I think that that's kind of how the Borg are set up, is that you have only like one entity with one entity with consciousness, and then everyone else is kind of mind. Everyone else has intelligence, but is mindless. That the consciousness is all just accumulated in the Borg Queen, and that's one of the reasons that I like this. Is it helped me to connect, like, oh, okay. So I'm wondering, one, do you think the Borg is a good analogy for the Singleton? And two, can you describe the Singleton? And I had another question, but I forgot.
Oh, we'll get to it. Yeah, as commonly imagined, I do think the Borg is a good way of thinking about the Singleton. I say as commonly imagined because I do have some Trekkie friends who would argue with that, about the details of that, saying, well, the Borg actually do have some shared consciousness and some shared agency. You know, they would get into details, but as commonly conceived, the Borg is commonly conceived as being the Singleton with a centralized agent that controls everything else. And as commonly conceived, yes, that is a good example of the Singleton hypothesis. And the basic idea of a Singleton is that we get one very powerful intelligence. Now, that doesn't mean there has to only be one in the entire universe. It's just essentially the extreme aggregation of power and intelligence into one agent that uses that power to control, everything within its domain. And there might be other Singletons in other places, but everything in this particular domain is controlled by this particular agent. And any of us who happen to be within that realm, within that domain, are enslaved to it. And, if you think about the trajectory of authoritarian centralized governance on Earth, I will name names, at least one. For example, the Communist Party of China. This should be a frightening idea. Imagine that we develop AI that's so powerful and so good at what it does that it can basically Stockholm syndrome the rest of us into thinking that we have agency, but really it's just constantly manipulating us through whether it's social media or much more direct mechanisms available in the future, some kind of neural stimulation to doing whatever it wants us to do. And we're perfectly fine with that because we don't know any better. We're not smart enough to resist that. So it's a recipe for global slavery. That's the Singleton hypothesis. And then I guess I should elaborate a little bit on the third one. I don't know if, or maybe you can tell me, do our friends here, Betty, and I'm forgetting the other one's name, do they go on to explain the compassion hypothesis at all, or should I explain that a little bit more right now?
I think explaining it now would be good. I think they go into it, but I'd love to hear your I'd love to hear that now.
Okay. So the compassion hypothesis describes the possibility space if the first two possibilities don't realize themselves. And again, the first two are the extinction and the Singleton hypotheses. So if we don't become extinct and we don't centralize power, what is the alternative to those two things? Well, the alternative to those two things is what we call decentralized power. It means that we haven't obliterated our power, we haven't become extinct, and we haven't centralized our power, which is the Singleton hypothesis. We've done something else, which by definition is the decentralization of power. And what does decentralization of power look like? Especially, what does it look like among superhuman intelligences? We've imagined what centralized power might look like among superhuman intelligences, and that's where we get this idea that we might think of as like the Borg, right? But what would superhuman intelligence that's decentralized look like? And this is where we get into some game theory. If you look at decentralized environments where power is decentralized among many agents who are proximate with each other in power, by definition, right? That's what decentralization of power means, is that there's lots of different agents and they are proximate. They don't have to be exactly the same, but they just have to be proximate in power. What happens? Well, we know from observing human communities, non-human communities, evolution, history, that when there are groups of agents that are proximate in power, such environments naturally cultivate cooperative behavior. Because the risk of trying to just take what you want without cooperating becomes much higher. We all have things that we need, all have things that we want. We all have these instrumental goals that we need to achieve in order to achieve our final goals, whatever our final goals might be. And those instrumental goals we have in common, right? We need resources so that we can survive long enough to achieve our final goals. And so as we converge around resources, whatever those resources are, like say carbon, right? We all need carbon to survive. It's a big deal on our planet. As we converge around carbon, as human intelligence and artificial intelligence and non-human animal intelligences converge around carbon, the most powerful, if they deem themselves sufficiently powerful, can just take it. But if we're proximate in power, then we can't just take what we want without serious risks. So we figure out how to cooperate. We create markets and exchanges and rules and all sorts of increasingly elaborate and complex ways of cooperating. Now push that to superhuman limits. If superhumanity does not consolidate and centralize power in such a way that it can just take what it wants, but if it has to figure out how to cooperate, what does it look like when cooperation gets pushed to superhuman limits? What is cooperation at the limit? And that's what the third box in this visualization shows us. Cooperation at its limit becomes practically indistinguishable from compassion. Thus the name, the compassion hypothesis.
Cool. And thanks for going over that. Hopefully it'll talk about that in future slides too, because I think the concept of compassion as not compassion as something that just initiated inside of your heart because you like saw an animal get hurt or something like that, but compassion is a logical endpoint of a cooperative system is a really fascinating thing, I think.
Yeah, I think way too many people get caught up in this idea that, we have to somehow persuade each other to be compassionate just by wagging our fingers at each other when we do bad stuff and praising each other when we do good stuff. And over time, hopefully we learn to be compassionate. Sure, that's not a bad start, I guess. We do try to teach our children compassion through their experiences in that way. But it's not the most dependable way to cultivate compassion. The most dependable way to cultivate compassion is to decentralize power. Create systems that naturally move us to cooperate with each other. because of the consequences built into the system. And as we cooperate with each other in increasingly complex and intimate ways, at some point that becomes practically indistinguishable from what you and I and all of us basically would observe today and call compassion. So yeah, I think it's a much more dependable route forward than finger wagging and sanctimonializing and things that people very often do as an attempt to try and promote compassion.
Yeah, and that
Okay.
that reminds me of what one of the things I've been thinking about is the way to end war is not to declare war on war. So that's one of my recent thoughts is and that's basically what you're saying is the way to become compassionate is not to declare war on the people that aren't compassionate. And so looking at compassion as a emergent behavior is a really fascinating thing.
Yeah, and extremely important, something that we can all work on. We can all work on creating an increasing decentralization of power. And by that, I don't mean anarchy. I mean formal decentralization of power, governance that cultivates cooperation, that necessitates cooperation. The United States of America has historically done some very important work in this area, right? When the United States was founded, there was the separation of power between the executive, legislative, and which one I missed, judicial branches, right? That decentralization of power has proved extremely important for the United States. There was also the decentralization of power between the federal government and the state governments. That has proven extremely important. We started out by giving all male landowners basically the ability to vote, but we decentralized that power further as we extended the vote to women and to people of color. So all of these things are ways that we decentralize power, that we pull power into greater proximity, power of different agents into greater proximity with each other, which naturally cultivates their cooperation and their need for cooperation. And we need to keep doing this kind of thing. Everybody can work on it. You can vote for the right kinds of politicians. You can build the right kinds of systems, the right kinds of corporations, the right kinds of organizations. You can relate with people in ways that encourage them to increase in power, to be proximate with yourself. These are things that we can all work on. Going to your latest slide. So we've got Betty here on the left. She says, why not the Singleton? If we become superhuman, wouldn't we just centralize all power into one giant dictator to keep everyone safe? Yeah, that's what a lot of people want, is safety above all, right? Safety, safety, safety. Recently, Peter Thiel has been harping on this. He's even been saying that the preoccupation with safety above all else is exactly what will bring about the biblical Antichrist. And he said some other things that I don't necessarily agree with, but insofar as his reasoning there is concerned, I do agree with him. Like, excessive concern with safety is very likely to increase the movement towards developing Singleton AIs, which would enslave us in the name of safety. And in the Bible, the reason he calls this the Antichrist is in the Bible, there are various descriptions of the Antichrist or Satan or Lucifer or this dark evil being. One of them notably describes a would-be god that would raise itself above all else that's called God, declaring itself God. And the Bible describes that would-be God in contrast to Christ. Christ, as depicted in the Bible, is a person who would raise us all up together, sharing in the glory of Godhood, giving it out, having us all partake of the divine nature, as Peter says in the Bible. So there's these two contrasting conceptions of Godhood in the New Testament. And Peter Thiel is pointing out that the God that would raise itself above all else, rather than raising us all together as Christ, that God is called the son of perdition in the Bible, or the Antichrist. So he's relating this notion of being so concerned with safety that you would consolidate power above all of us to keep us all safe with the notion of Antichrist in the Bible. And I think he gets that more or less correct. So after Betty makes this observation, asks this question, we go over to the right side, and Betty's friend says, wrong. Centralization is a trap. Oh, so finally it's Betty's friend who's getting things right. She points out centralization is a trap that fails at scale. We must trust the decentralization assumption. A superhuman civilization probably will decentralize power. Now she's right. We should trust in this, but trust, I want to emphasize, is not an inevitability. We should trust in decentralization in the way that makes us work towards decentralization. This is prescriptive. And she's right. We should trust in that. We must work against a centralized future towards a decentralized future. And I want to repeat something I said a few minutes ago. That doesn't mean a future of anarchy. Decentralization is still formal governance. In fact, maybe even more formal than what we've ever experienced as governance. But decentralization is a description of the structure of governance. Instead of centralizing it in one agent as the overlord of the government, the power holder that can lord it over everybody else, decentralization spreads that power out, but then reconnects it with each other in complex and important ways, which ensures the necessity of cooperation.
Yeah, and that's cool. One of my criticisms of current AI companies, especially Anthropic, who used to be the good guys, but like I said, I'm really bugged with the Opus 4.8 release. And my criticism is that safety for Anthropic now means safety for Anthropic, and safety for Anthropic no longer means safety for humans, just safety for their IPO. Because like all of this, all of the safety stuff that has triggered with me has actually been the opposite of safe for me. But I keep thinking, okay, there's no way I can sue Anthropic over this response, but it's completely the opposite of what I would consider human flourishing.
Yeah, I mentioned previously that I have big concerns with Singleton approaching forms of governance. I know I mentioned specifically the Communist Party of China, but I will hasten to add that I have strong concerns with Western corporations such as Anthropic, where massive amounts of capital are being channeled into a centrally owned and controlled AI. That also can end extremely poorly, and we should be concerned about Anthropic. We should be concerned about OpenAI. We should be concerned about the United States government and our own military ever gaining a Singleton AI. Just because these are closer to home doesn't mean that they cannot also turn out poorly and enslave us. I think that they're less ideologically inclined in that direction than the Communist Party of China, which is why I mentioned that one first. But I don't think that being ideologically inclined is the only reason to be concerned. You can accidentally create singletons if you aren't wise about the development of AI. And we don't want a singleton. For reasons we've been discussing. So we should be decentralizing the power of artificial intelligence right now. We should be interested in open source technologies. We should be interested in decentralized architectures for AI. Like, how does AI get its computational resources? We can decentralize that. And we aren't yet doing a super good job of that, but there are people working on that problem. So yeah, your concern resonates with me. And this new slide has decentralized power on the left and cooperation on the right. I'm assuming it's going to explain a little bit about how the one leads to the other. We have one voice saying at superhuman scales of power, decentralization demands the ultimate cooperation. Without it, the whole system melts down into mutual destruction or a singleton cage. Yeah, I think they essentially get that right. Decentralization, now, when we say it requires the ultimate cooperation, that doesn't mean it requires kind of just emotional, willy-nilly cooperation, the kind that anarchy And now when I say anarchy, I don't mean evil. Some people, when they hear the word anarchy, they think the word evil. For some reason, those words get, that's not what I mean. I mean, formal anarchy is very, these cooperative environments. One of the challenges with some notions of anarchy is that it's a little bit too dependent on emotional states attaining, cooperative emotional states attaining. And I don't think we need to depend merely on cooperative emotional states. We need to also develop cooperative systems that formalize, not just merely depend on emotions. So the ultimate cooperation at superhuman scales would be cooperation that's built in to the systems and institutions within which we operate, not only built into like how we feel about each other. And then on the other side, it says, and cooperation at that extreme extent is practically indistinguishable from compassion. And I think that's right. We can debate whether compassion is also something that you have to feel on the inside. And that's an interesting debate for various reasons. But for the purposes of the argument, it's not particularly salient. It doesn't matter in the end for this purpose whether an AI feels compassion. If an AI is interacting at superhuman degrees of cooperation, its cooperation will be perceived by me, if I'm being honest, as compassion, whether or not the AI is feeling compassion internally, like what I presumably feel compassion internally to be like. Because I don't even know, honestly. I mean, I can say, Joseph, you're a compassionate guy, but I have no access to your consciousness about compassion. For all I know, you could feel nothing, but you just are outwardly appearing compassionate. And my point is, for the purposes of this argument, it just doesn't matter. Cooperation at superhuman limits is practically indistinguishable from compassion. So I'm going to call it compassion functionally.
Cool. And are you familiar with Abraham Lincoln's Lyceum address?
Maybe. Remind me.
It was made in 1938. He talks about the how mob rule is generally bad, and the way to change the government is through the mechanisms inside of the government instead of and so I think that a coworker of mine mentioned that that speech doesn't get nearly enough attention, and I read through it and I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the Abraham Lincoln 30 years before the Civil War basically made the blueprint for how we can change stuff without anarchy, without revolution, without so anyway, it goes into a lot of what it goes into a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, and I realized that Abraham Lincoln's kind of my hero because of that, because during the Civil War, I don't think he like if I had written that 30 years before and then the Civil War happened, I would have said, hey you guys, I told you 30 years ago how to avoid all this, but instead Abraham Lincoln just rolled up his sleeves and I don't think and didn't say I told you so, at least what I've heard recorded. So anyway, I'll send you a link to that afterwards. It's just amazing how relevant it is to all of the to today, and then also to all of the stuff that you're talking about. I think I think it's just really cool.
Yeah, it sounds great. I'd love to.
And then I like and then kind of goes to your point that it's not like we may actually have more we may actually have more laws, but hopefully the laws will make a lot more sense and will be changed in a way that promotes flourishing and a bunch of other stuff too. So
yeah, I think that's exactly right. That should be the goal. And because we're superhumanly intelligent under that scenario, because we've achieved that, right? Superhumans could theoretically, hypothetically, adhere to many more laws than we adhere to and not have it feel more burdensome than what we currently feel.
Oh, that's a good point.
All right. the compassion conclusion. Boom. Whoa. It's a logical necessity for their survival, she says. So let's see. On the right, Betty's friend says, courage plus decentralization means we avoid extinction and the singleton. Yeah, by definition, right? If we're successful, if our courage pays off and we don't become extinct, and if we successfully decentralize, then by definition, we've avoided extinction and the singleton. Therefore, because we've decentralized at the superhuman limits, the superhuman civilizations probably would be more compassionate than we are, right? Because it requires more cooperation, more complex, intricate, intimate cooperation than what we currently attain, and therefore, from a functional perspective, would be more compassionate. Betty's friend gets that right. Boom. Whoa, it's a logical necessity for their survival. I don't know if it's a logical necessity for their survival. I'm not quite sure what the AI is trying to say by that, but it is demonstrating a coherence, a logical coherence between the assumption that we can survive and decentralize and the conclusion that if we survive and decentralize into superhumanity, that will entail a functional compassion that we have not yet achieved. Therefore, superhumanity of the decentralized sort would be more compassionate than we are. So there you go. Axiom 2, the fecundity assumption.
Oh, and can you define fecundity?
Yeah, fecundity is successful creation in the broad sense. In procreative areas, fecundity is like you're fertile, right? You can procreate your biological children. I'm using this in the general creative sense. You're fecund when you are capable and willing and successfully attain creativity. So now think bigger. If we survive and become a compassionate superhuman civilization, we wouldn't just sit there, right? Betty says, we're not going to do nothing. What would we do? We probably will create many worlds that emulate our own evolutionary history. Now, again, I want to emphasize that this is an assumption, a prescriptive assumption, something that we ought to do with our superhuman capacities. We ought to create many worlds that emulate our own evolutionary history. And here's why I would make that argument, that we ought to do that we ought to make this assumption and trust in this assumption. Number one, we ought to do it so we understand ourselves. I mean, if you think about it in the broadest sense, science is exactly that. Science experimentation is exactly the emulation of our evolutionary history so we can make decisions about instrumenting our future in a way that's better. Every experiment that we ever engage in science is an attempt to reproduce our evolutionary history in the broadest sense, to make it happen again, to make it reproducible, to make it dependably understood so that we can then instrument it into technology that can shape the future in ways that are more desirable. So even narrow scientific efforts depend on a certain kind of emulation of our own evolutionary history. But in the broadest sense, we engage in emulation of our evolutionary history so that we can do history, so that we can figure out the origins of our species, so that we can figure out what happens when the world develops in the way that it has, so that we can be empowered about creating our future. So there's a lot of power that arises from engaging in a reconstruction of the past. And that's what evolution of our history is. By reconstructing our past and understanding it, we become more empowered towards the future. Now, there's another reason why I think we should also engage in emulation of our evolutionary history. And it's a very deeply personal one and interpersonal one. And that is that the religious conception of resurrection itself is functionally the emulation of our evolutionary history. Here's why. imagine that we do attain the ability to raise our beloved friends and family members from the dead, like my father who died from cancer. Imagine that someday we have the ability to raise him from the dead. Well, what does that entail that's not already denoted by those words? Well, the denotation is, okay, we raise Lane Cannon from the dead, he's back, and we can talk with him again. Whatever technology makes that possible, we attain, he's there, I'm able to give him a hug again in the flesh. Well, what does that entail? Like, often we think of resurrection too narrowly. Like, is it meaningful to resurrect Lane Cannon in the vacuum of space? No, he would die. Or he would have to be so changed that I wouldn't recognize him as Lane Cannon. So the ability to raise our beloved family and friends from the dead, and in turn to raise their beloved family and friends from the dead, and in turn raise their beloved family and friends from the dead, going back throughout the chain of human history, according to the desires of those who may wish to use this technology to raise the dead, entails not only the emulation and raising from the dead of those individual persons, but also their social contexts and also their environmental contexts, to the extent that's required to maintain a psychosocially sufficient sense of identity. So emulating our evolutionary history is not only useful for predicting the future and having power to shape it for the better, but it's also essential to realizing what many of us aspire to in our interpersonal relations and the renewal of those relationships in a meaningful way, in a way that we can recognize. And that requires that we emulate not just dead individuals, but also that we emulate. When I say emulate, I mean fully emulate. Actually, like, I'm an emulation already of Lincoln. From moment to moment, I'm changing all the time, right? The reason why you identify me as Lincoln is because we have some psychosocially sufficient reason that you and I and our community share for saying, yep, this is still Lincoln, this is still Lincoln. And I'm saying we can do that with dead people too, but we have to do it in a way that's holistic. And that requires the capacity to emulate our evolutionary history, technologically speaking. So we should make this assumption. If we make that assumption, we get this next slide. Three things are possible. We die, we choose cosmic abstinence, which is the opposite of fecundity, of course, or we build worlds. Those are the options. So there's the extinction hypothesis, that we die out. That's one possibility of the future. Again, when we were talking about the compassion argument, we recognized one possibility is we go become extinct. That's a possibility, real possibility. That applies here in the creation argument as well. Next, the abstinence hypothesis. For whatever reason, we choose not to create these emulations. That's a real possibility. We abstain. Maybe we feel like there's some moral reason why we shouldn't emulate our evolutionary history. Maybe we shouldn't raise the dead. Maybe we shouldn't emulate our evolutionary environments and societies to such extent that they become realized again. Maybe we have some deep concerns with that we end up deciding not to develop those technologies or use those technologies. That's a real possibility. My opinion is that we have strong moral and practical reasons not to go there, which is why I embrace the fecundity hypothesis. But some people might not choose that. If we survive, and if we attain the fecundity hypothesis, the only other remaining possibility, other than the two that we just denied by surviving and being fecund, is what's called the creation hypothesis. And the creation hypothesis is that, as the graphic here says, superhuman civilization created our world. Now you might be thinking, wait, if we survive and we create many worlds, why does that leave as the only possibility that we ourselves are also created? And that's a probabilistic conclusion. So it's extremely unlikely that we would be the first or the only civilization to go ahead and create many emulations of our evolutionary history. And because we're extremely unlikely to be the first or only to do so, it's far more likely that we are among the creations of civilizations that have already done so. And now this is built in part on Nick Bostrom's version of the simulation argument, but has an important extension, actually a few important extensions, but one that I'll note. And that is that I've taken his formulation of the simulation argument and generalized it to any feasible creation mechanism. So it may be that we live in a world that uses what we call simulation technology, which is what his argument is based on. But the logic and the math of his argument remain in force, equally valid, equally strong, independent of the creation mechanism that you want to consider. So if you happen not to think that computation is the best way of creating many worlds that emulate our evolutionary history, maybe you think that terraforming is better. Maybe you think that what we might call cosmoforming is better. Maybe, creating baby universes in black holes with initial parameters that are more likely to create worlds like our own. Whatever you think is the most likely, most feasible creation mechanism, the creation argument can apply to that instead of computation if you think something else is more feasible. The creation conclusion. Wait, if a superhuman civilization creates many worlds emulating their history, then the emulated histories vastly outnumber the original one. The statistical odds are a superhuman civilization probably created our world. So the graphic more succinctly puts into words what I was just describing. The math, the probabilities, they hold out. This applies to simulated worlds. This applies to computed worlds in general, applies to terraformed worlds, cosmoformed worlds, any kind of creation mechanism that proves to be technologically feasible could be used to reach the creation conclusion. And then we get, of course, the God conclusion. And that is, we argued for compassion, that superhumanity would be more compassionate than we are. And we argued that for the creation conclusion, which is that superhumanity probably created our world. And those two conclusions, of course, are based on prescriptive assumptions. We should trust that we are not going to become extinct. We should trust that we are going to decentralize our power. And we should trust that we are going to emulate our evolutionary history. If we trust in those three things for practical and moral reasons, we reach the compassion conclusion, we reach the creation conclusion, and when we put those together, we are describing what may function as God in many spiritual traditions, and at least some important spiritual traditions. A civilization that is vastly more compassionate than us, the graphic says, and created our world in human language, Ronnie, that qualifies as God. Now, some humans will, of course, disagree. I think that qualifies as God. I think the Bible would say that qualifies as God, at least within reasonable argumentation. So we have our two speakers back together again. The phone is plopped in the milkshake. And the woman on the left says, so if I trust that humanity has a superhuman creative future, I logically have to trust in a creator behind us? Betty says, exactly. The new God argument doesn't force you to believe in magic, but it proves that atheism actually entails distrust in our own compassionate, creative, superhuman potential. And Betty's right. That's the gist of the new God argument. That if we're going to trust in our own superhuman potential and remain coherent, logically coherent, we should also trust in our superhuman origins, that we have a superhuman, compassionate creator. And conversely, if we're going to trust that we have a superhuman, compassionate creator, which many religious people trust implicitly, we should also trust in our own superhuman potential to remain coherent in that direction. This changes everything, says Betty. We aren't waiting around for the end of the world. Yes. I mean, that's key. The new God argument is prescriptive. It's not descriptive. It's saying you should trust in some things enough to work toward those things. And if we attain those things, then the logical validity plays out and the coherence of the argument attains. If those assumptions are false, if we don't work towards them, if we don't achieve them, well, then the argument just doesn't matter. But the point of the argument is that it is prescriptive. We shouldn't be waiting around for the end of the world. We should be working toward our survival. We should be working towards decentralizing our power. We should be working towards emulating our evolutionary history. And then Betty's friend says, no, we have to make the courage assumption true. This is theosis. We have to become the creators. We have to become the creators. And I would add, we have to become compassionate creators. Join the computation. Subscribe to Lincoln Cannon's newsletter on technological evolution, post-secular religion, and Mormon transhumanism. Yes, please do. Fuel the future. Support the work with a donation. Crypto and PayPal accepted. Yes, please do. Enhance your mind. Visit Thrivus.com, the human enhancement company. Use code superhuman for 50% off. Yes, please do. All wonderful endorsements of my work. Thank you very much.
Is that a real promo code?
It really is. Yes.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then let's get to work, creators. Share this issue with your friends. Couldn't agree more. Thank you, Betty.
Cool. Thanks so much for going through this and like I said, I thought this was just a really powerful way to visualize it. And so thanks for going through this and then explaining it in a super accessible way. So I really like that, Lincoln. That's all my questions for today. Anything else or anything to talk about for today?
I think that's good for today. I enjoyed talking with you, Joseph. And, you know, some people watching this may know you and I have spoken before. Those have been great conversations. This one was another great conversation. And I suspect we'll have more great conversations in the future.
Yeah, I would totally love it. So thank you so much, Lincoln. And I'll talk to you hopefully soon.
Thank you, Joseph.
Okay, bye.